Hey everybody, Lonnie here. So we're moving along with our Atmo front-end application written in Angular. We're going to create a data service in this case, consuming the API that we've created that's reading the OCS data store, this sequential data store. Looking at the architecture here real quick, we've done the top part. Now we're working off of this API and we're developing this Atmo application that's in Angular, and the last part we got the base application. Now we're going to add that data service that's going to read that get snapshot and get forecast values. So let's go ahead and come over to the application and get started. So the first thing I want to do is just use the Angular CLI to add a data service, and that's pretty easy. We'll just do ng generate with a G, and then we put S for service. I want to put this in its own directory. So I'll put services, and I'm going to call this data. So let's go ahead and create the files within that folder. We have them right here, and here's the base TypeScript file. So we need to bring in our HTTP client to be able to make the request back to the API. So let's go ahead and do that. If I come over to app modules here, we can do an import, and that's going to be a HTTP client module. And Angular common HTTP. And then we just need to bring this module down here as an import, and then we can come back to our data service and we can bring in the HTTP client. So we'll do that. And that's going to be from Angular, once again, common, and HTTP. So once we have that, create an instance of it here in the constructor. And that's going to be HTTP client. Okay, now we're going to have two methods, two functions here in our data service, the snapshot and the forecast. So let's create the snapshot. And this is going to be an observable. When our app component makes this request, it's going to wait for the data to come back through this client. So we need to make this an observable function. In order to do that, we need to use the observable from RxJS. So we'll do an import, and we'll bring in our observable from RxJS. There's a lot of information on how observables work with RxJS. I'm not going to take the time to explain it here, but essentially, we're going to subscribe to it. When the information comes back, then that subscription function that we use is for the observable subscription will then execute. You'll see how that's going to happen in a moment. So now we can go ahead and we can get our snapshot function set up as an observable, returning type string. Now down here is where we're going to use the HTTP client. So we'll take this HTTP client. We're going to do a get, which is going to return a string. And now within this get, we want to pass in our URL. I'm going to come over to the browser, and I have Azure portal opened up here under our Atmo services that we've created. And I want to look at the get snapshot and get that URL, and then we can just build it off of that. So here's the function URL that we've used for testing. I want to use the host here with this host key. That host key is going to be common for both the forecast and the snapshot. So I'll copy that, and we can just do a test here to make sure that works. See how that looks? There's no location ID in here, so let's go ahead and add a location ID. And we know that's napa.pluto. And we'll still pass in the key. Try that one more time. Okay, there we go. Let's come back to the application. We know that we have URL, so let's set up some variables here, and we'll make our base URL equal to this part right here, and then we have our key here. Right. Then we have our location. And we know that's napa.pluto. go ahead and set up our URL. I'm going to use the backtick so I can concatenate all this together. So we're going to do our base URL, and then we know that we have our we have to do a / get snapshot and a question mark, and then location ID. That's going to equal our location ID. Oh, so we need to put this in here. And then we can do, finally we can do our code, and that's going to equal our key, this dot key. Okay, this will now return an observable, and once that observable is completed, then we can go ahead and process the data. So to set the observable up, we're going to come over here in our app.components, and we want to bring in our data service first. So we're going to do our data service. And that's going to be from services, data service. And then in the constructor, we need to do the same thing. We're going to need to do a private, and then data service, and that's going to be data service. Now down here is where we're loading our data, so we can call this data service. And the way that call looks is we just go on this.dataService, get snapshot, and the get snapshot will come back. We want to subscribe to that call since it's an observable, and then we're going to have our data, and we'll set that as a lambda expression, and then we'll execute this function. I want to go ahead and capture that data. We'll set up a variable up here, and we'll call this a snapshot, and we'll call that any, and then we can say this.snapshot equals data. And if all that works, we should have data coming back. And let's look at what that data looks like. We know that we're going to have a temperature here and a value. So let's go ahead and display that in our HTML. So let's go ahead and make that. Then I'm going to put another div here, and I just want to display that a value from the snapshot. So we can do snapshot dot temperature dot value. Okay, go ahead and save all of this, and I'll do an ng serve here, and we'll see how that looks. Okay, go ahead and go to our localhost 42. All right, so we can see we have a 72.1 that's coming back from this. Let's try, yep, 72.1, and we're seeing that. If I come over here, put a breakpoint under the snapshot, we can just see that we have all of our data here. Everything's set up, and we'll be able to display all this information once we get it formatted. I just want to bring something in, make sure everything's linked together. Let's come back to our application and get our forecast data. So under our data services, we're going to do pretty much the same thing as we did with our get snapshots, but we're going to do a get forecast. And we know we have it here. Everything else is identical. So now we come in here, want to take same thing within our data services. We're going to make a second call now, and this will be our get forecast. We'll subscribe in our data, and this one we'll set it up as our forecast here. Set up our forecast variable, right? And then the loading. I want to put the loading after everything comes back. I want to put it right here. We'll make this loading false. Now, in a complete example, if we had more time, I would do error handling. I would catch these errors, and then I would have like a error loading variable like I have for the loading in the /hold, and then I would set that to true, and then display something telling everyone that, yeah, you know, the data didn't come back for whatever reason. But I'm just trying to keep this this manageable in size. It's already quite a long series, and I don't want to get just add in more and more stuff. So anyway, that's a note. That's an exercise for you to try to do to add in error handling at the data source level and the component level here. Okay. I think the last thing I want to do is, once again, I want to bring in, under another div, I want to bring in the forecasting information. So this would be a G4, and we'll bring in let item of forecast.daily. I'm going to bring in the daily values, and I know the daily values, let's come back to our call here, and we can just look at the forecast real quick. So we have snapshot. Let's go ahead and get forecast. See what that looks like. So I have the daily. Let's display the summary for each day. Daily.summary.value. And then here we can do item dot summary.value. Okay, let's come back and change everything here. It's loading. Awesome. So we can see we have the forecast summaries for each day. We don't have any timestamps or anything like that, but we are bringing back the data. Okay, so that is pretty much what I wanted to get done in this part, where we have our data service now. We have these two methods, and in our component, we're calling these on the init and the loading data. And we have these snapshot and forecast variables that's holding all that data. So now we're going to be working on that front end part, and we'll get our current information displayed at the top, and then we'll have our forecast information displayed below that. That'll be a couple more parts, and then the last part, we'll deploy it to Firebase. All right, my name's Lonnie. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you're following along. You've made it this far. I think this is the rewarding part, where we're actually seeing this information come to life in an application. It's quite a bit of work, all the way back to where we're reading data from the weather station and putting it in a collector and feeding it in and all that stuff. So it's been a very, very cool journey, and I'm looking forward to finishing this out. Okay, I'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye-bye.